Okay, so now that you've got your highlighters ready, we'll start looking at this text. Normally literature essays don't have pictures in them, but they're there just so that you can remember the film if you haven't seen it for a while, or perhaps to illustrate the point if you haven't seen the film at all. Okay, so at the beginning of George Lucas's Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker, who's pictured here, finds himself captured by the Wampa on the frozen tundra of Hoth. Now, I'm not highlighting this sentence, but just to show you where it is, this sentence here does nothing. All that it's doing is signaling or pointing to the moment in the text that I think is impactful. This is an early moment in the text, but probably about 7 or 8 minutes of the film has passed at this stage. So what I'm essentially doing is giving a page reference without actually giving the page reference or the time reference of the film. I'm telling the examiner, or I'm telling the assessor, the moment in the text that I found impactful in terms of raising an idea. So if you like, it's context. So you might write next to that first sentence, context. What it's doing is nothing in terms of getting me any marks, but it's allowing the assessor to go, okay, well, they recognize that this moment is important. They know the film, they know the text, and that's what they're going to talk about. Moving on to the next sentence. He has to look inside himself for the strength to escape his perilous scenario. So this is my interpretation. This is my interpretation of the moment. So I'm going to highlight that in green. And what I'm doing is you can see I'm actually responding to that position that was taken by J.B. Burroughs. The idea that, the protagonist is exploring this psychoanalytic idea. So he has to look inside himself for the strength to escape his perilous scenario. It's an interpretation because it's never explicitly said in the film. There's no commentary, there's no dialogue to suggest that that's what we're meant to take away. This is something that I decide while watching, cued by various things in the text. So once I offer an interpretation, I have to support that, or I have to explain or justify where it came from. So this is where I'm going to start to use my evidence, my yellow highlighter for evidence or examples. And then when I give an example, I need to break it down and explain why it shows that thing. So have a look at what I say next. In his position, hanging upside down with his feet frozen into the ceiling of the ice cave, this is specific textual reference. So this is my evidence. Luke resists the temptation to panic as he hears the crunching of the Tauntaun's bones. Resisting the temptation to panic is further explanation of my interpretation. At no point is this resisting the temptation to panic explained in the film. There's not some voiceover going, Luke resisted the temptation to panic. That is not the style of film that we're looking at. It's an assumption that the audience makes. Why do we make it? Because we hear something. So in film, we talk about sound as evidence. We hear something that helps us make that assumption. So this is evidence. It's evidence of some of the audio in the text pointing us towards a certain thing. It indicates to the audience what his own fate will soon be. That crunching of the bones does that. Okay? That crunching of the bones and the fact that he's hanging upside down have this effect that leads to the interpretation that I've had. So if you think about the structure of these two sentences, I've offered an interpretation. I've signaled the evidence that supports that interpretation. I've added a little bit to the interpretation. I've signaled some more evidence, and I've suggested what those two bits of evidence do in terms of their effect. I've deconstructed them. I've then move on. While his lightsaber presents a means of escape, so this is evidence, lightsaber is an object in the film, it's a prop, if you like, presents a means of escape is deconstruction, because it's telling us what that thing represents. The fact that it is out of his reach should signal his doom. So again, this is about evidence. This is about the space on the screen. Okay, so it's about the way the shot has been set up. You can see that shot there. Should signal his doom is deconstruction. But closing his eyes, this is an actor's choice. This is the performance, if you like, so it's evidence. And then saying that this is a sign of introspection. It's what the closing of eyes represents, so it's deconstruction. He summons his reserve of concentration and focus to draw on the mystical energy of the Force and is thus able to retrieve his weapon. That's just what happens. So in a sense, that's the context as well. But what's important is this closing his eyes, a sign of introspection, okay, allows him to do this thing. So if you follow this through, he looks inside himself to escape the perilous scenario. He closes his eyes, he's introspecting, he's drawing on his own strength, his training, the minimal training that he's received in the Force. Okay. This last sentence almost acts as like a little mini conclusion. So given these interpretations, this evidence, and this deconstruction, I have been led to this conclusion. Occurring early in the film, this moment of looking inside oneself for solutions that appear to be almost impossible establishes a reoccurring idea within The Empire Strikes Back. So that is more. I haven't said exactly what the idea is, although it's implied that it's looking inside oneself for solutions. But that has been the result of this discussion. Okay, now just one other thing while I'm thinking about it to note. Notice that when I use the title, I underline it to distinguish it from other evidence or other things in the text. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to follow that discussion and see that it doesn't have a formal structure like the Teal structure. It has some of the same elements. It has evidence and explanation, but it has the, in a sense, the topic sentence that you would be used to comes more at the end of the paragraph, and there's no link necessarily, although that purple part is really a link back to the prompt that I was using. Okay, next paragraph, we'll see how we go with this one. This is obviously a longer piece of discussion. It might get more complicated, so there might be more inning and outing of those different colours. Look at the first sentence. After aiding in the Battle of Hoth, which is the planet that he's on, Luke elects not to join the convoy with his friends, so that all of the rebels go off in a convoy of spaceships, thus protecting them from future danger. That's why he does it. But to venture out into the universe on his own. So like the last paragraph, this very much starts with a moment of the story that I'm going to focus on. There's a little bit of interpretation there. So thus protecting them from future danger is interpretation of the text. But I know at this stage that that's not going to link to my interpretation of the character. I know that that's not going to be pertinent or relevant at the moment. So it's really just a passing comment. Venture out into the universe on his own is much more important. It's really telling the person reading this essay, my paragraph's going to be about what he learns doing that. But all of that sentence, that whole first sentence, is still that context sentence. So start to see a pattern here that often what I'm doing is starting with the moment. I'm saying this is the moment that I was interested in, and come back to that sitting in the cafe talking about the play that you've just seen or the book that you've just read with a friend. You wouldn't start by saying, I think this when this comes up. You'd start by saying, what did you think of this moment? Or wasn't that scene particularly interesting? That's the same thing that I'm doing here, talking about the moment that I'm about to explore. This essay does work through the film sequentially, and that's often not a bad way to go at this stage. Later on, we'll present you with some more diverse choices. So, in order to convince himself that he's making the right decision, he draws on the words of an important figure from his past to inspire and guide him. This is my interpretation of what's going on in this moment. So I'm going to highlight that in green. In green, there we go. Luke heard this disembodied voice in a moment of need. Now, that's an extension or elaboration on this last sentence, but the use of disembodied voice is actually evidence. Okay, so I'm sort of giving some detail on aspects of the text. Having escaped from the Wampa and about to lose consciousness in a snowdrift, Ben appears before Luke and tells him. So this is moment sort of context, but it then goes into a specific quote, which obviously is textual evidence. The voice of Obi-Wan could be seen to be Luke's inner motivation, interpretation. Okay, so you see how I'm narrowing down my focus. So my interpretation before was very broad. Then I've provided some evidence and I've narrowed that interpretation down even further. And a way of assuring himself that he's doing the right thing. This is all interpretation. It gives him both purpose in this moment and then after the battle to move forward and progress to become greater than he is. This is also evidence. Now, what colour at this stage have I not used? I haven't used the blue. So I haven't deconstructed anything at this stage. It's a much broader interpretation and support. If I were to critique this essay, this is an essay that I wrote about 3 years ago, I would say that there should be, by this stage in a paragraph, some blue highlighting to indicate what the words or what the techniques of the filmmaker are doing to achieve that interpretation. But you can see that it's not necessarily a perfect paragraph so far. Hopefully I'll remedy that, otherwise I'll be slightly embarrassed. He also reinforces this voice by discussing his choice with his robot companion R2-D2. This is a little blue and white robot you might have seen, whose whistles and beeps suggest that he is making the wrong choice. So this is an interpretation, but notice that I'm talking about some specific evidence, the whistles and beeps. Okay, specific evidence, whistles and beeps, suggests he's making the wrong choice. Now, that, I think, is interpretation. What should be in there to have that blue colour is the tonal quality of those whistles and beeps signals distress or signals concern compared to his normal sounds. Some statement of the nature of the whistles and beeps that leads me to that interpretation would be necessary. You know, R2-D2 only speaks when he's worried, when he's concerned, when he's trying to warn people. Some discussion of that would be necessary there to get full marks, and that's what I would be highlighting in blue. Luke's response to R2-D2 that he would like to keep it on manual control for a while, which is obviously a quote and therefore evidence, could also be seen as Luke taking greater control. This is interpretation. Not only for his X-Wing, but also metaphorically for his life, and thus suggesting that his inner dialogue has given him a sense of self-assurance. Now, that's also interpretation. Why am I highlighting it separately? It's more complex interpretation. It's much more symbolic, and it's leading towards that sort of purple color. It's really linking back in to the overriding idea of the essay. Additionally, speaking to a robot could suggest that he is not convincing the droid, who is merely there to serve his needs, but rather himself that he is doing the right thing. Now, I think that this is deconstruction, okay? Up to there. Oh. So, speaking to a droid through to the end of that phrase, that's deconstruction. What I'm doing there is I'm deconstructing the symbolic meaning of the droid, okay? He's there to serve the master's needs, and so talking to him in a sense is talking to himself. So that is interpretation. Just that little bit there, okay? So that's interpretation. Notice that this paragraph is not the same in terms of the structure of the last one. So the last one had a little bit of interpretation, quite a bit of evidence, good amount of deconstruction, sort of fairly balanced, and then it ended with a big idea. This one has a lot more interpretation, not as much evidence. It has quotes, which the last paragraph didn't have. But it has a really significant imbalance. There's a lot of interpretation, not a huge amount of evidence, only a tiny bit of deconstruction, although there should be more, but there's no big idea. The big idea doesn't have to come at the end of each paragraph. It needs to come when you feel you've made some significant development in your awareness or understanding. And at this stage, I'm just continuing to explore the last idea. Okay, I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'm going to let you have a go on your own. So moving on to the next page as well. Once on Dagobah, which is the planet that he's going to receive his training, Luke faces hardship that he must overcome in his training. So again, this sentence here is just contextual. It's just talking about the moment and the story that's going on. You need to keep these brief, otherwise I'm going to tell you that there's no need to recall the story, that I know the story quite well, that I know the play quite well, that I know the poem quite well. But all that it needs to have is a signal, a little flag. This is the moment. The first of these, the hardships, that he is having belief in the unlikely figure of Yoda. Now, Yoda is that little green dude that talks in a non-grammatical way, and he's the master of the Jedis. Okay, he's the sort of the head honcho. As Yoda does not appear to be the figure of a great warrior, this is deconstruction. So I'm deconstructing the character. Notice that when I start talking about very technical aspects, or I start pulling apart things, in this case, the characterization of Yoda, the look of the character design, that's deconstruction. Okay, unlikely figure could be interpretation, you could say. Okay, but largely this paragraph has started with deconstruction. Perhaps I was compensating for an awareness that the last paragraph didn't have much. He conveys Lucas's view that strength is determined by intrinsic measures within oneself rather than by external characteristics. That is the interpretation. Okay, that's a very significant interpretation. Yoda says later in the film, "Do or do not, there is no try." This is a quote, so obviously it's evidence. Closely followed by his rhetorical question. If you're talking about the quality of the question, then that is deconstruction. Judge me by my size, do you? Now, what does rhetorical mean? It means that the answer is implied. Judge me by my size, do you? Really implies, of course, you shouldn't. Okay. Now, the rhetorical, the use of meta language is often a good signal for the fact that it's deconstruction. Both pieces of dialogue indicate Yoda's determination and contrast his diminutive stature, highlighting that his power and strength must indeed come from within. Now, that part of the sentence is interpretation. This part of the sentence, talking about the effect of the questions and the nature of the language in them, the contrast between them, is deconstruction. So again, can you see that structure, the pattern of the purpose of these aspects of the writing, does not follow the same pattern as the last paragraphs. But working out and trying to have a balance of these three aspects is quite important. Despite Luke becoming aware that Yoda is the master that he has been sent to train with, it is not until Luke gives up on himself that the viewer is made to see that drawing on internal strength is the most vital quality of one's growth. It is not until Luke gives up on himself is an interpretation. Okay. The bit before that is really just reframing the moment within this larger, it's probably about a 30-minute sequence of the text. So within this larger sequence of the text, this moment it is what I'm focusing on now. After failing to draw his X-Wing out of the swamp, Luke gives up, leading to Yoda discussing Luke's prospects with the voice of Obi-Wan. So again, this is more, stitching together the moments of the text. I'm starting to talk about a specific moment in the text. I haven't quoted it because it's too long, so it's vague evidence. I'm reluctant to highlight that, but I'm going to anyway. Yoda turning to this voice reinforces the need to draw on an internal quality established earlier in the film. Okay, so that's, I'll take it all the way down to the end of the sentence. That is the interpretation. Okay. Equally, the subsequent action of levitating the ship and convincing Luke that he should not look to external qualities to determine what is possible establishes the character development required for the protagonist to achieve his goal. So I've got subsequent action of levitating the ship is the evidence. So this is an image in the film. Convincing Luke that he should not look to external qualities. That's me paraphrasing what Yoda says. Establishes the character development is deconstruction. Required to achieve his personal goals is sort of just wrapping it up. So in that paragraph, what you should be able to see is that there is a bit more of a balance between the three colors. There's sort of a little bit more blue than the last one, still not quite as much, and you'll probably find that that's fairly common in film, unless you're talking about the actual makeup, the technical development of the film. But there's a little bit more of a balance. There's still no purple though, because I'm still developing and refining this idea, and that's quite common at the beginning of an essay, and this is only a page or so in. What you should find as we get further into the essay is that we have a little bit more of that purple, a little bit more of that wrapping up of the ideas. You can see though, even though I'm not highlighting it in purple, achieving the goal, I'm going to highlight it just for the point of making this point before I leave you with it. Achieving the goal is better understanding himself, being able to impact the universe. So achieving the goal, in a sense, is a very subtle link back to those big ideas. If you look back into the last paragraph that we highlighted, there's something similar there. Okay, he is doing the right thing. You know, that understanding of self, that understanding of being able to do the right thing and help the universe. So I am trying to end with that, but I'm not coming to something as crisp and as clear as this definite statement of the meaning of the whole film. Because, of course, by the time I've finished talking about levitating the X-Wing and talking to Yoda, we're only really half an hour into, or 40 minutes into, a 2-hour-long film. So it would be too early to say that the film has communicated a clear idea yet. It's starting to build to that suggestion, which is why I'm being a little bit subtle and a little bit gentle with, saying for sure this is what the film is doing. Okay, so hopefully that gives you enough to keep going. I'd like you to have a go at continuing to work through the essay with those 4 colours and highlight what you think the purpose of each component of the sentences are. This is a hard task. You might find that you're going, oh, is that interpretation or is that deconstruction? Is that evidence or is that, analysis? So don't stress too much, but the purpose of looking at it is going, do I see that there's not a clear pattern? Do I see that that there's an attempt to balance those aspects? Do I see that rather than saying what is thought, what an answer is, and then proving it is not what this is doing. Instead, actually what it's doing is exploring moments and reaching some conclusion through those moments about what might be suggested. Keep in mind, like I said, this is not a perfect essay. It sometimes doesn't have enough of certain aspects, whether it be specific evidence or deconstruction. And annotate where you think there should be more, where you think there's an imbalance, where you think there should be some more specific evidence, where you think there should be some more discussion of the effect of that evidence. Then annotate that, point out in the margin that there should be some more here, because I will be doing that on your work. So it's only fair that you do it on mine. Remember that this task is part of your reading journal in terms of developing your skills and showing that development and that understanding of reading and writing practice. So make sure that you keep these notes somewhere that you'll be able to hand in eventually, whether it be by email or whether it be in hard copy. If you have any questions today, please email me. Hopefully this video doesn't take too long to load up, but you need to have seen this and worked through this material before the next lesson, because you will be trying to write a discussion like this on Ode to a Nightingale yourself.